My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 32 years old. And 3 weeks ago, at my father's retirement gala, I erased myself from my family. Not quietly. Not gently. But finally. Picture this. The ballroom at the Ashford Country Club glittered like a jewelry box cracked open. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling. Champagne towers shimmered under golden lights. 200 guests in silk gowns and tailored suits laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. My father stood on stage, center spotlight, holding a microphone like a king addressing his court. And then he destroyed me. But I didn't break. To the outside world, we were the Whitmores of Fairfield County. Old money posture, new money ambition. My father, Charles Whitmore, was CEO of Whitmore Freight Systems, a respected logistics company that moved goods across the East Coast. Not glamorous, but powerful. Important. We lived in a 6-bedroom colonial house with white pillars and trimmed hedges shaped by professionals who arrived every Thursday at 7 a.m. sharp. My mother died when I was 8. Ovarian cancer. Fast. Cruel. It devoured her in less than a year. I don't remember her voice clearly anymore. That realization used to haunt me. I remember her laugh like distant wind chimes. I remember the way she tucked my hair behind my ear. I remember her whispering once, "You are stronger than you know, Claire." 2 years after she died, my father remarried. Victoria. She came with a son, Ethan, 3 years older than me. Within months, they weren't additions to our family. They were the family. And I became background furniture. Not abused. Not screamed at. Just slowly erased. Ethan was brilliant. Ethan was driven. Ethan was the future of the company. I was sensitive. I was dramatic. I was still adjusting. At 16, Ethan got a brand new BMW. I got the old sedan after the leather cracked. At graduation, Ethan's 3.5 GPA was exceptional. My 3.9 was nice. There's something worse than cruelty. Indifference. And my father mastered it. My grandmother, Margaret Whitmore, was the only one who ever looked at me like I mattered. Every Sunday at 4 p.m., without fail, she called. "What are you reading this week?" she'd ask. "What are you dreaming about?" No one else asked me about dreams. When I was 19 and talking about studying international business, she smiled and squeezed my hand. "You're not small, Claire. They just don't know how to see you." I didn't understand then how prophetic that would be. I was 20. Sophomore year at UConn. Business major. 3.8 GPA. I had just filled out an application for a summer program in London. That Wednesday, my father called. "Come home. We need to talk." I knew those words meant something was being taken from me. In his study, dark wood shelves, leather chairs, the smell of polished power, he sat behind his desk. Victoria stood beside him like a quiet shadow. "Ethan has been accepted into Wharton," my father began. I felt my stomach tighten. "That's incredible," I said carefully. "It is," Victoria chimed. "Such an opportunity." My father folded his hands. "Unfortunately, we can't afford both your tuition and his MBA. The lie hung in the air, invisible but suffocating. "So," he continued, "you'll need to take a break from school. Just temporarily." My ears rang. "You promised Mom you'd support my education," I whispered. His jaw tightened. "Circumstances change." Victoria added sweetly, "A woman doesn't need an MBA to live well, Claire. You'll marry someday." I remember staring at the wall behind them. There was a family portrait there. Ethan in the center. My father's hand on his shoulder. I stood at the edge of the frame. Just like always. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. But something inside me, something soft, died. I moved to Boston with $2,000 and a suitcase. My apartment was 400 square feet above a laundromat in Alston. The radiator clanged like it was haunted. The smell of detergent soaked into my clothes. I worked mornings at a cafe and afternoons as an administrative assistant at a small logistics firm called Barnes Distribution. The owner, Walter Barnes, was blunt and unimpressed by self-pity. "You're smart," he told me once when I stayed late reorganizing supply data no one had asked me to touch. "So stop acting like you're not." I devoured free online courses at night. MIT OpenCourseWare, supply chain analytics, operations modeling. I learned everything. Quietly. No LinkedIn posts. No announcements. No one to applaud. 4 years later, at 24, I registered my own company. Northbridge Logistics Consulting. Just me. A laptop. A rented desk in a shared workspace. I didn't use my name publicly, because I knew my family. If they knew I was succeeding, they'd either claim credit or try to crush it. So I built my life in silence. When Grandma Margaret died 2 years ago, I sat in the back pew at her funeral. My father gave a speech about family values. The hypocrisy tasted bitter. 3 days later, I received a call from a Boston estate attorney. "Claire, your grandmother created a trust in your name 8 years ago. No one else was informed. The amount, $800,000. My hands shook. There was a letter. She knew about the tuition. She knew about the lies. I argued with your father, the letter read. He wouldn't listen. So I prepared you for the day you would no longer need him. I cried harder than I had in years. She had seen me. I used part of the trust to expand Northbridge. 15 employees. $4 million in annual revenue. An office in Back Bay with floor-to-ceiling windows. And here's the part that feels almost poetic. One of our largest clients was Whitmore Freight Systems. My father's company. They never knew I owned Northbridge. All contracts went through my CFO, Daniel Mercer. For 3 years, I optimized their routes, cut their costs, strengthened their margins. The daughter with no future had quietly become their backbone. When the invitation arrived, heavy cardstock, gold embossed. "Charles Whitmore requests the pleasure of your company." I almost declined. But something in me knew. This was the ending. I wore a simple black gown. My grandmother's pearls. Nothing flashy. Victoria intercepted me at the entrance. "Oh, Claire. I wasn't sure you'd have something appropriate to wear." I smiled. Inside, Ethan was shaking hands, already acting like CEO. My seat. Table 14. Near the service doors. Of course. I listened as my father praised Northbridge Consulting during cocktail hour. "They're the reason our margins are so strong," he boasted to a shipping executive. "Whoever runs that firm is a genius." I nearly laughed. If only you knew. The lights dimmed. My father took the stage. He thanked his partners, his wife, his brilliant son. Then his eyes found me. And my daughter Claire. Spotlight. 200 faces turned. He smiled that glass-sharp smile. No degree. No real career. Just freeloading off the family. But hey, at least she showed up. Laughter. Real laughter. My body went cold. I had expected something. But not that. Not public humiliation. Not this cruelty wrapped as humor. I stood slowly. The laughter faded. I picked up my champagne glass. "Congratulations, Dad," I said, voice steady. 40 years in business. Quite an achievement. Silence. "You taught me a lot about sacrifice. About loyalty. About how family defines worth." My eyes never left his. "So here's to you." I raised the glass. "This is the last time any of you will ever see me." And I walked out. No tears. No trembling. Just the sound of my heels echoing across the hardwood floor. And that was only the beginning. I didn't cry when I left the ballroom. That surprised me. I thought humiliation like that would shatter me. I thought I'd sit in my car shaking, replaying the laughter over and over. But instead, I felt calm. Dangerously calm. For most of my life, I had hoped my father would change. That one day he'd see me. That maybe, deep down, he loved me but didn't know how to show it. That night, under the chandeliers, in front of 200 strangers, he ended that illusion. He didn't just ignore me. He enjoyed diminishing me. And that was the moment something inside me clicked into place. He thought I was nothing. So I would show him exactly who I was. At 6:30 a.m., I was in my office at Northbridge. Back Bay was still quiet. The city wore that soft early morning stillness before traffic and noise take over. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the skyline. Then I said the words out loud. Terminate the Whitmore contract. Daniel, my CFO, blinked. You're serious? Yes. He hesitated. Claire, they're 20% of our revenue. I know. He studied my face carefully. Did something happen last night? I let out a breath that felt like it had been sitting in my lungs for years. They humiliated me in front of their board and partners. Publicly. Daniel's expression hardened. Then they're done. No more hesitation. No debate. Just loyalty. Draft a formal notice, I said. 30 days per clause 14.3. No explanation required. He nodded. But I wasn't finished. And schedule a meeting with their executive team. In person. Here. He understood. This wasn't just business. This was closure. The official termination notice went out at 9:12 a.m. Polite. Clinical. Devastating. Effective immediately, Northbridge Logistics Consulting will exercise its right to terminate services to Whitmore Freight Systems within the contractual 30-day period. We thank you for the partnership. That was it. No emotion. No accusation. No explanation. But I knew what that letter meant. Whitmore Freight had become dependent on our route modeling systems. Our proprietary optimization software. Our predictive demand analytics. Without us, their shipping costs would spike within months. Margins would shrink. Investors would notice. Ethan's first year as CEO would begin in chaos. And they had no idea the freeloading daughter had been the architect behind their strongest growth period. At 10:03 a.m., my phone rang. Dad. I let it ring twice before answering. What is this? He demanded. Good morning to you too. Why did Northbridge just terminate our contract? I smiled slightly. You'd have to ask the CEO. Put them on. I am the CEO. Silence. It stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. That's not funny, Claire. I'm not joking. Another pause. Then a short laugh. You don't run Northbridge. Yes. I do. You don't even have a degree. I finished my degree online while working 2 jobs. Then I built a consulting firm from scratch. We have 15 employees. 4 million in annual revenue. And for the last 3 years, we've been the reason your margins improved by 11%. His breathing changed. Subtle. But I heard it. That's impossible. No. What's impossible is thinking I stayed small forever. He switched tactics. Fine. You're involved somehow. So stop being emotional and reverse the termination. Emotional. Of course. I'm not being emotional. I'm being strategic. You're going to damage the company your family built. You mean the company you built? You made it very clear I wasn't family. His voice sharpened. You're overreacting to a joke. It wasn't a joke. It was harmless. It was honest. That hit him. Because he knew it was true. "I'll see you at 2 p.m., I said calmly. "Bring Ethan." And I hung up. At exactly 2:07 p.m., they walked into my office. Dad looked furious. Ethan looked confused. Victoria hadn't come. Daniel sat beside me at the conference table. The skyline behind us reflected in the glass walls, power without shouting. Dad looked around. "This is your office?" "Yes." He ran a hand across the polished table, as if checking whether it was real. "You expect me to believe you built this?" "I don't expect you to believe anything. The numbers speak for themselves." Daniel slid a portfolio across the table. "Performance reports. Growth metrics. Signed contracts." Ethan flipped through the pages. His face drained of color. "Your Northbridge," he whispered. "Yes." He looked up at me differently for the first time in his life. Not as competition. Not as background noise. But as a threat. Dad pushed the folder away. "This is personal revenge." "No," I replied evenly. "This is professional boundary setting. You're punishing us. You humiliated me publicly. It was a joke. You laughed." He had no answer. Silence filled the room. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I opened my purse and took out an envelope. Yellowed with age. "My grandmother left this for me." His jaw tightened at the mention of her. "I didn't know she'd set up a trust in my name." $800,000. Ethan's eyes snapped to Dad. "You said Grandma didn't have that kind of money." Dad's face darkened. "She didn't," he said sharply. "She did," I corrected softly. "She liquidated assets after you refused to fund my education." Ethan looked between us. "Wait. What?" I met my father's eyes. "You told me we couldn't afford both our tuitions. But you could. You just chose him." "That's not." "It is." The truth sat between us like a loaded weapon. Ethan leaned back slowly. "You lied." Dad's control was slipping. "This is irrelevant." "No," I said quietly. "It's the foundation. I will honor the 30-day transition," I continued. "After that, you'll need to find another consulting firm." "You're making a mistake," Dad warned. "No. I'm correcting one." He stood abruptly. "You think this proves something?" "No. It frees me." Ethan stayed seated. For once, he wasn't defending Dad. He looked at me not with hatred. With realization. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. And I meant it. He had benefited from favoritism. But he hadn't orchestrated it. Dad stormed out. Ethan lingered. "You're really walking away?" he asked. "I walked away years ago." And then he left too. By evening, word had spread through industry circles. Whitmore Freight's primary consulting partner had withdrawn. Investors called. Board members panicked. Dad sent 3 emails. I didn't respond. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to him. I was moving forward without him. That night, alone in my apartment, I took out Grandma's letter again. "You are stronger than you know." I whispered it out loud. And this time, I believed it. But this wasn't the end. Because the board of Whitmore Freight wasn't interested in pride. They were interested in profit. And when numbers started falling, they would need answers. For 30 years, my father believed he was untouchable. Power does that to a person. It builds a false ceiling over their head. They stop looking up. But numbers don't care about ego. And numbers were about to collapse his empire. The first week after we sent the termination notice, nothing happened. Whitmore Freight continued operations. Trucks moved. Ports cleared shipments. Emails were answered. On the outside, everything looked stable. Inside, panic. Northbridge had been running predictive demand modeling every 72 hours. Without our system, they reverted to manual projections, the same outdated spreadsheets they'd used 5 years ago. Shipping delays increased by 4%. Then 7%. Then 11%. A major retail client noticed first. They pulled 2 contracts. It didn't make headlines yet. But investors noticed. On the 12th day, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Ms. Whitmore, this is Harold Finch from the Whitmore Freight Board. Harold Finch. I knew the name. He'd been on the board longer than my father had been CEO. We'd like to request a meeting. Regarding a potential strategic partnership. Translation. We are bleeding. Send a formal invitation, I said calmly. My assistant will coordinate. I hung up and stared at the skyline again. 4 years, I had watched that company from a distance. Now they were coming to me. 3 board members arrived. Not my father. Not Ethan. Just suits and calculation. Harold Finch spoke first. We weren't aware Northbridge was owned by you. That seems to be a pattern, I replied. A few uncomfortable shifts in chairs. Your firm's analytics have been instrumental, he continued carefully. Since the termination notice, we've experienced operational instability. Define instability. Projected Q3 losses could reach 18% if unresolved. There it was. The real number. They weren't worried about pride. They were worried about collapse. We'd like to renegotiate. Another board member added. Long-term contract. Increased compensation. And Harold cleared his throat. We are considering leadership restructuring. I didn't blink. Meaning, if this continues, we may request Charles Whitmore's resignation. The room went quiet after that. They weren't saying it directly, but the implication was clear. My father's throne was cracking, and I was holding the lever. We would also like to discuss, Harold continued slowly, whether you'd consider taking an executive advisory role. Possibly more. More. The word echoed. You want me inside the company? Yes. After decades of excluding me. This is business. I leaned back. Exactly. They slid a folder toward me. Preliminary terms. Equity percentage. Advisory authority. Transitional CEO potential. I felt something strange in my chest. Not revenge. Not satisfaction. Power. Real power. For years, I thought justice would feel explosive. Instead, it felt quiet. Controlled. Like holding a steering wheel instead of sitting in the back seat. That evening, my phone rang again. Dad. I answered this time. What are you doing? He demanded. Running my company. You're manipulating the board. No. They're reacting to performance. You're trying to replace me. I didn't ask them to approach me. Silence. Then his voice changed. For the first time in my life. He sounded afraid. You would destroy your own father. I closed my eyes briefly. You destroyed the relationship years ago. You're being vindictive. No. I'm being visible. Another long pause. You don't understand what it took to build that company, he said, softer now. I understand more than you think. I've been optimizing your mistakes for 3 years. That hit hard. Because it was true. Ethan isn't ready, he muttered. There it was. The real fear. Not his reputation. Control. If he isn't ready, I replied calmly, then you didn't prepare him well. 2 nights later, someone knocked on my apartment door. Ethan stood there. No suit. No arrogance. Just exhaustion. Can I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. He looked around my place. Modern. Clean. Independent. You built this, he said quietly. Yes. He ran a hand through his hair. I didn't know he cut your tuition. I know. I thought you dropped out. I was told to. He sat down heavily. The board is turning on him. I know. He's furious. Says you're orchestrating it. I'm not. He looked at me carefully. Would you take his place? The question hung between us. For years, I had wanted validation. Now I was being offered authority. They approached me, I admitted. And I haven't answered. He studied me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. You'd be good at it, he said. That stunned me more than anything else that week. No sarcasm. No competition. Just honesty. I don't want to destroy him, Ethan added quietly. But I can't defend what he did to you. For the first time in our lives, we weren't on opposite sides. We were just two people raised by the same flawed man. After he left, I sat alone in the quiet. If I accepted, I would become CEO. I would take the company that had erased me and reshape it. I would sit in the office where my father once told me I wasn't worth investing in. If I declined, I would walk away clean. Untouched. Free. Revenge tempts you. Power tests you. But peace. Peace is harder to choose. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. They're desperate. Whatever you decide, we're secure. Secure. For the first time in my life, my future didn't depend on my father's approval. It depended on me. I walked to my desk and opened a blank document. Subject line. Whitmore Freight, proposal response. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. This was about choosing who I wanted to be. Claire didn't choose revenge. She chose control. The board approved her terms within 24 hours. Charles Whitmore would step down gracefully. No scandal. No public humiliation. Just strategic succession. But before the announcement, her father came to her office. For the first time in her life, he didn't stand tall behind a desk. He sat across from her. You're taking everything, he said quietly. I'm taking responsibility, Claire replied. That's when he admitted the truth. Her college fund, the one her mother and grandmother built, had been used to save the company during a financial downturn. He never replaced it. Instead, he chose to invest in Ethan's future and quietly close Claire's door. I thought it would be simpler, he confessed. One heir. One path. You didn't simplify anything, she said calmly. You erased me. There were no tears. No dramatic breakdown. Just truth, heavy and long overdue. 2 days later, in the same ballroom where he humiliated her, Claire was announced as interim CEO. She didn't mention the insult. She didn't attack him. She simply said, "Capability does not require permission." And this time, the applause was real. Her father clapped too. Not proudly, but respectfully. Becoming CEO wasn't the victory. Fixing what ego had damaged was. The first 3 months were brutal. Clients were nervous. Employees whispered. Industry media speculated about the daughter takeover. Claire ignored the noise. She focused on systems. She rebuilt internal reporting transparency. She restructured executive bonuses based on measurable performance. She quietly removed 2 senior managers who had enabled financial shortcuts under her father's leadership. Ethan surprised her. Instead of resisting, he worked harder. One evening, he knocked on her office door. I used to think you were dramatic, he admitted. I didn't realize you were just being ignored. It wasn't an apology, but it was growth. Their relationship shifted from rivalry to professionalism. They weren't close, but they were aligned. Meanwhile, Charles Whitmore struggled with retirement. Without the company, he seemed smaller. Restless. Disoriented. One Sunday, he invited Claire to dinner. It was awkward, polite, careful. Halfway through the meal, he said quietly, "I don't know who I am without that company." Claire looked at him not as the man who diminished her, but as someone who had built his identity on control. "You're more than the title," she said. "You just never let anyone else be." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was understanding. 6 months later, Claire found something unexpected while reviewing archived company records. A letter. Not from her grandmother. From her mother. It had been stored in a sealed envelope labeled "For Claire, when she leads." Her hands shook opening it. Her mother had written it during her final months. "If you are reading this from a position of leadership, then I was right about you. You were never meant to follow quietly. You were meant to build." Claire sat alone in the CEO office, her office, and cried for the first time since the gala. Not from pain. From release. She hadn't just taken over a company. She had fulfilled a belief someone had in her long before she believed it herself. Later that year, Whitmore Freight posted record growth under her leadership. But the real transformation wasn't financial. It was cultural. Merit over favoritism. Transparency over pride. Respect over hierarchy. And one quiet afternoon, as she looked out over the city skyline, Claire realized something important. She no longer needed her father's approval. She had outgrown the hunger for it. When Charles visited the office months later, he paused at the doorway. "You've made it better," he admitted. Claire nodded. "Yes," she said calmly. "I have." And this time, there was no tension between them. Only acceptance. A year after Claire became CEO, Whitmore Freight was stronger than it had ever been. Revenue up. Client trust restored. Company culture transformed. But the real change wasn't in the numbers. It was in the silence. The silence at family dinners was no longer heavy with comparison. Ethan stopped trying to compete. He started collaborating. Slowly, cautiously, they became something close to allies. Charles Whitmore aged faster in retirement. Power had once defined him. Without it, he seemed smaller but softer too. One evening, he asked Claire to walk with him through the old neighborhood where she grew up. They passed the house with the white pillars, the trimmed hedges, the illusion of perfection. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly. "Of what?" Claire asked. "That if you were stronger than Ethan, I'd lose control of everything." Claire stopped walking. "You didn't lose control," she said gently. "You lost the chance to trust me." He nodded, eyes tired. "I'm proud of you," he said, and this time, it wasn't forced. It wasn't public. It wasn't strategic. It was real. Claire felt the words settle inside her, not like a hunger finally fed, but like a chapter gently closing. "I don't need you to be proud anymore," she said calmly. "But I'm glad you are." And that was the truth. She had built her life without permission. She had led without favoritism. She had healed without revenge. Months later, standing in her office, she placed her mother's photo on the center of her desk. Not as a reminder of loss, but as proof of promise fulfilled. Claire Whitmore was never the forgotten daughter. She was simply the one who refused to disappear. And in the end, that made all the difference.